As Pakistan welcomes a new prime minister, what are the challenges ahead? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Shehbaz Sharif is the new Prime Minister of Pakistan. The former leader of the opposition Pakistan Muslim League took over after his predecessor, Imran Khan, was removed in a parliamentary no-confidence vote earlier this week. CGTN's Daniel reports from Islamabad.
Shehbaz Sharif has now been elected as the 23rd Prime Minister of Pakistan. Meanwhile, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf's Babar Awan raised an objection to nomination papers of the combined opposition's candidates, saying that Shehbaz Sharif would be the first Prime Minister in the world who is on a bail for 10 months in corruption cases. Shehbaz Sharif was expected to secure 176 votes of the combined opposition, and his votes probably reached and touched over 200 because there were over 24 dissidents of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf who also decided to participate in the voting process in his favor. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan had, at a public rally, claimed that the move to topple his government was the result of a foreign conspiracy. He later named that country as the United States. His allegation was based on a cable received from Pakistan's ambassador to US, in which he had reported about a meeting with Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia Affairs, Donald Lu. The ambassador had reportedly said that Donald warned that Imran Khan's continuation in office, who was facing a vote of no confidence, would have repercussions for bilateral relations. The US was said to be annoyed with Mr. Khan over his independent foreign policy and especially his visit to Moscow. It was interpreted by the government as a threat. The US has denied any involvement, but Imran Khan and his government held high-level meetings of national security, asked the Supreme Court to review the letter, went to the parliament to take it into confidence. Imran Khan said many of his party members were bought with large amount of dollars, but all his efforts fell on deaf ears, and finally, after a lot of controversy, his government was overthrown. The millions of people of Pakistan took to the roads and said they will support Imran Khan and will expose the locals and foreign faces behind this regime change.
That was Daniel reporting from Islamabad. To discuss this and much more, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Alexandria, Virginia, is Shuja Nawaz. He is a distinguished fellow and former director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council and author of the book, The Battle for Pakistan, The Bitter U.S. Friendship in a Tough Neighborhood. Here in Washington, D.C., Farahnaz Ispahani is a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center and a former member of Pakistan's parliament. From Beijing is Zoon Ahmed Khan. She is a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization and anchor of China Economic Net. And in Lahore, Pakistan, Saad Rasool is a lawyer and columnist. I want to welcome all of you to the show. And Saad, why don't I start with you? Imran Khan out, Shehbaz Sharif in as Prime Minister. How do we get to this point? I mean, there's these allegations of basically mismanaging of the economy, got on the wrong side of the military. He, of course, accusing the U.S. Of meddling. Sort it all out for us, if you can.
Imran Khan's rise to power in Pakistan was atypical for anybody when he came to power in 2018. Prior to that, since 1985, with the exception of the military years of General Musharraf, other than those years, since 1985, Pakistan has primarily been ruled or governed by two political families, the Sharifs and the Zardaris. The Sharifs representing Pakistan Muslim League Noon, and the Bhuttos and Zardaris representing Pakistan People's Party. So Imran Khan's presence at the political scene had irked a lot of people in and outside of the country. And notwithstanding his outsideness, there was also problems with Pakistan's economy in the midst of COVID and disruption of the global supply. There was a rise in inflation, unemployment. So all the political parties in Pakistan kind of gathered around Imran Khan and tried to depose him through the parliamentary process. But this had been going on for about two and a half years. except that very recently, ever since Imran Khan publicly announced that absolutely not to any bases from the United States here in Pakistan, and visited Russia in the midst of Russian invasion to Ukraine, suddenly the anti-Imran Khan movement within Pakistan started to gain momentum. And within a few days, we saw the no confidence move being presented in the parliament and numbers shifting against Imran Khan's favor. In the midst of it all, Imran Khan, in a public rally, raised a letter, waved it in front of public, and said that this was an official communication that, according to Imran Khan, had been received from the United States, in which Pakistan had been threatened that if Imran Khan stays in power, Pakistan will be isolated by the West and its allies, and that if Imran Khan loses the vote of no confidence, which at the time had not yet been presented, that Pakistan will be forgiven and the relations between the West and Pakistan would become better. Imran Khan used that letter in the public rally to say that this is an international conspiracy at the behest of the Americans, and that through this conspiracy, the Americans are trying to depose him from power.
Okay.
This letter was presented before the National Security Council of Pakistan, which includes the services chiefs and opposition leader even, who didn't show up, but he's included. And that National Security Council, which is the formal body and constitutional body in Pakistan, agreed to the fact that there was foreign interference of an unprecedented record.
All right, there's a lot to digest there, but we do have to kind of sort of move on, and I'm sure you could go on for another 2 or 3 minutes. There's a lot to unpack there. Farahnaz, you're a former member of the Pakistani parliament, 75 years and counting as an independent country. Not one prime minister has made it to serve a full term. Why is that? Did you think Khan had a chance?
Look, I keep explaining this to everyone, but this is the thing. A parliament has a term of 5 years. A prime minister does not in the Pakistani parliamentary process. So this is not a big deal. Mr. Nawaz Sharif didn't finish his parliament's term. Yusuf Raza Gilani, who was the PPP prime minister, didn't finish the term of the parliament that he was prime minister. So this is another one of what we call fake news and a distortion of the history and facts of Pakistan that a lot of these people, unfortunately, from Mr. Khan to other people in his party and his supporters, like to throw out. I deal in facts. The facts are that this is not a big deal. Many prime ministers have not finished the term of the parliament they came in with.
Interesting. Well, Shuja, Pakistan has been governed, as it was earlier pointed out, by basically two families, the Bhuttos and the Sharifs, for some time. Khan, seen as an outsider, as we heard, a famous cricketer, managed to connect with regular folks. Is this just a return to the past in a sense?
In some ways, yes. And it's a return to the past now because we have a coalition of parties that have previously ruled Pakistan, except that they've now formed a coalition, as they did once before, and that coalition fell apart. So let's hope that this time they manage to stick it out, because they've all agreed to sign a so-called Charter of Reform, which is very similar to the Charter of Democracy that they signed when the late Benazir Bhutto was still active and alive and getting ready to go to Pakistan. And that was signed in 2006. And so this is now a laundry list of 12 high-minded objectives filled with hope and wishful thinking. And the question is whether they'll be able to make it happen. We shouldn't forget that for more than half the life of Pakistan, it has been ruled by the military, directly or indirectly. So let's not blame the political parties alone for whatever ills exist in the Pakistani political system. The military has been behind the scenes, and they've been unable to politically engineer the solutions that they thought would put Pakistan on an even keel. And they're now facing a new test, because their own candidate, whom they supported in 2018, that was Imran Khan, who came out of nowhere to become the prime minister, then reinstated a government of political turncoats, essentially, taken from the other political parties. Many of them had changed party loyalties 3 or 4 times. So it is back to the future for Pakistan, but it's in the midst of a serious economic crisis And that is really what's going to determine the fate of any government in Pakistan.
And Zoon, how does this leadership change impact its relationship with the other countries in the region? Of course, Afghanistan also has its own dire economic situation going on. Some of the other neighbors in that region, Iran, of course, China, India, the relationship between Pakistan and India has been fraught for decades. How does this change the dynamic there, do you think?
So I think firstly, I'll start with China because I'm here in Beijing and one of my focuses is the China-Pakistan cooperation. With China, the fact is that if we look at now currently Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is in power, and it was their party, the PMLN, that was in power when CPEC was envisioned, announced, and the first phase started. And it is also a fact that in Pakistan, all political parties and all institutions have a consensus that this relationship is important. The approach they take towards this cooperation may vary a bit. As we saw when the PTI came into power, they wanted to focus a bit more on socioeconomic aspects. So with China, the relationship stays the same. Maybe some would say with the PMLN's focus on economic cooperation in general, with the track record, maybe what Shehbaz Sharif states is that perhaps they can speed up the second phase, which was about industrial allocation, industrial transfer, more investments in the infrastructure that has been constructed. So with India, I think it's interesting that since a month and a half, these developments have really been speeding up. And there was a feeling in New Delhi and even among analysts in Pakistan that perhaps we will see an improvement of relations with India. Now, of course, during Prime Minister Imran Khan's tenure, there were some complications in the relationship with India. And I think a lot of it also has to do with Kashmir when Article 370 was abolished by India. And that basically ruins, the basic tenets, the basic prerequisite between Pakistan and India on the issue of Kashmir is that the status of Kashmir is obviously these two countries have to negotiate on Kashmir. So that was a very low point. And the criticism that Imran Khan has been getting from the opposition is not that he was too hard on India, but that not enough was done when this incident occurred. So I'm not sure exactly how the equation with New Delhi will change, but there seems to be maybe an opportunity because Prime Minister Modi also congratulated Shehbaz Sharif. So it may be an opportunity for India to think of dialogue and think of ways to at least have some kind of communication, better communication, and we've seen better phases in the dynamic between India and Pakistan previously, also during the Sharif government. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, I think anyone in Pakistan and people observing understand that the two countries have what we could call a symbiotic relationship. Instability in Afghanistan and obviously the current crisis in Afghanistan affects Pakistan gravely. Imran Khan's government, among other challenges, including COVID, etc., also faced that situation where the withdrawal of troops resulted in a very uncertain and precarious situation in Afghanistan. And to continue these multilateral mechanisms, for instance, recently we had in China the foreign ministers meeting between neighbors of Afghanistan. All of these mechanisms are something that the PMLN government should definitely be supporting. So the consensus to help stabilize, help stability in Afghanistan through regional mechanisms stays the same. So I think overall the foreign policy doesn't seem to change too much. The basic dynamics can stay the same. Okay. But Shehbaz Sharif, just lastly, Shehbaz Sharif is known as a pragmatist. He is very pragmatic in his relationships domestically. And I see that kind of an approach being followed as he is Prime Minister. Okay, as a pragmatist, Saad, how does he deal with the economic turmoil in Pakistan? Because inflation very high, that's got to be one of the first things domestically he's got to address, right?
Absolutely. Shehbaz Sharif has basically three basic or four basic problems in front of him. He's got to address the economy immediately, and he's got to be able to tell the people of Pakistan and convince the people of Pakistan in the very short term that he has left of about 16 to 18 months that that a vote to him would in the upcoming general elections would really be a vote towards economic betterment. And given the current conditions, especially the international conditions of disruptions in supply chain, oil prices, that's not likely to happen. Secondly, Shehbaz Sharif is now at the head of a very precarious government, which is a conglomeration of about 13 political parties, some large and some very small, and he has to try and accommodate each one of them because his term to power has come from a majority of only just 2 votes. And just equally importantly, he has Imran Khan on the streets. And Imran Khan, regardless of the fact that he had a sort of downturn in its popularity because of the lack of economic indicators or lack of economic betterment, but ever since he has sort of come up with this political narrative of there being an international conspiracy, especially from America, to oust his government and to install what he calls an imported government in Pakistan, the people on the street have responded to him in millions. We have seen 2 of the largest public gatherings, one that happened in Peshawar some time ago, just 2 days ago, and one that is happening as we speak in Karachi, some of the largest public gatherings in Pakistan's history. So Shehbaz Sharif, as a prime minister, has to be able to show not just political astuteness to get through this issue, but also real results and a counter narrative to Imran Khan, who at the time seems the most popular at the peak of his popularity.
It's going to be interesting to watch. Farahnaz, to that point, we have 100 members from Khan's party who resigned on Monday. So he's got issues, there's no doubt about it. But one analyst says his greatest challenge may be legitimacy. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The number one challenge is of legitimacy. The new prime minister is already marred with controversy, different sort of allegations, and people are questioning why they are questioning the legitimacy, because the entire process has been tainted with the allegations of horse trading, of buying and selling of loyalties. So this is one challenge the new government will be facing: how to legitimize itself.
And do you agree with that assessment?
No, I don't. Let's be very clear again that, in Pakistan, the things that have to do with the constitution are decided by the Supreme Court. That's the process that was followed. It was a constitutional decision. The verdict from the Supreme Court came out. There was voting in the parliament, and the process was followed. It was a democratic process. The issue here now is Mr. Khan is going back to what he does best. He is a superb campaigner, bar none, but he was a terrible administrator. And he has left the country with soaring inflation, a rupee that was in free fall, a lack of gas, a new educational system he was talking about, and the country had a rise in attacks of blasphemy cases against religious minorities, human rights abuses, and curbs on the freedom of the press. So all of these were very, very undemocratic moves by the former prime minister. And he's continuing with this polarization, which is not in the best interests of Pakistan. At this point, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has a short time in office before we go to a general election. And in that time, Mr. Khan should put the country first, as he keeps saying that he's doing, and allow Mr. Sharif to try and look at the economy and try and stabilize things, try to talk to the IMF, try to work out things, because Mr. Khan basically blew up this giant bomb in Pakistan's foreign relations and economy. And, it's going to take us, some analysts say, it could take us 3 decades for Pakistan to get back to where we were before he came in.
Okay.
And the bottom line is, I need to say that because your other guests have taken quite a lot of time. The bottom line is he came in as the anti-corruption crusader. He came in saying, I'm the alternative to these 2 big former parties, the PMLN and PPP. Well, now the corruption charges that are coming up around the people who are closest to him. So, I would say to him, Mr. Khan, stop polarizing, get out of the street and let Pakistan function and undo some of this harm. that you have wreaked on the country.
Well, Shuja, to the point of Khan himself out there attracting large crowds, your title says it all, the battle for Pakistan, the bitter U.S. friendship. What happens with that bitter U.S. friendship as he continues to send out these allegations about the United States perhaps meddling in the affairs of Pakistan?
Mike, this has always been a very unequal partnership between the United States and Pakistan. I think it is captured by the word misalliance, which is a marriage between unequal partners. And the United States does try and influence Pakistan, no doubt, but I don't think that Mr. Khan proved any conspiracy. Because had there been one, the meeting of the National Security Council that was held on March 31st, he would have presented all the evidence, and the communique that was issued by the government after that meeting would have used the word conspiracy and given the evidence and the proof of that conspiracy, or the fact that members of parliament were being bought by foreign money. None of that happened. It was a very flat-footed response from the government. It was a flat-footed response from the military also, because 2 weeks after that, only yesterday, they actually came out and said that there was no conspiracy discussed in that meeting. Démarches was issued to the United States. Now, démarches are a dime a dozen. You tell another country to stop interfering in our relations, and that's the end of it. You don't break a relationship. The point which others have made, and I want to emphasize, is the economy. The IMF program has been suspended. Pakistan will need the order of $35 billion of financial resources over the next year or two. 6 billion of that was coming from the IMF. 3 billion is still due. The program has to be reinstated, and it can be reinstated with support from the United States and other Western countries and from China, which are major shareholders of the IMF, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank. Without this kind of infusion of assistance from abroad, Pakistan is going to be in dire straits. I don't think the country has 3 decades to resolve its problems.
Well,
it has at most 5 years.
Well, Zoon, let's talk a little bit about that, because you brought up the $60 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor. Is there more room for China to get involved from an economic standpoint to prop up Pakistan at this phase?
Well, I think there has been. The China-Pakistan. Let's start with the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which was obviously the first phase started in 2015. Now, at that time, Pakistan was facing a heavy economic crisis that peaked, that started in 2007. And the point behind the CPEC, which obviously aligns with the Belt and Road vision, was to determine mutually, based on what Pakistan's requirements are as well, and improve the basics of the country's economy, if I can say that in simple words. In a nutshell, that meant obviously energy infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, special economic zones. And in general, in China, there's a vision also based on their own domestic experience that if you improve the infrastructure, generally, that can take an economy towards a better direction. That said, we have seen completion of the first phase to a great extent. And the point of this first phase was also to enable better opportunities, create job opportunities for ordinary people, and fix those basics that are wrong with the economy. Pakistan's trade deficit being a major, I would say, a factor in where Pakistan finds itself. So for China, generally, the focus is that how can we help Pakistan become more self-reliant? And with Shehbaz Sharif now in power, of course, there has been a very positive equation previously during the PMLN government between the Chinese and the Pakistanis. So I think in general, China has been supportive. Their way to help and to be, they don't control those international financial institutions, of course. But how can China, within its capacity, within the Belt and Road mandate, help Pakistan alleviate these issues is definitely on the agenda. And certain projects have also come up. Shehbaz Sharif is trying that now major infrastructure projects that were being discussed while the PMLN was previously in power, if they can be restarted, that could be a positive development. So what China really, being in the region and being a major stakeholder in Pakistan's in Pakistan's economy and overall stability, of course, being part of the region, is that how can these issues be resolved? So China's way of helping, China's way of dealing with these issues is quite different. And it is also based on China's own experience over these 40 plus years of reform and opening up.
Saad, as it stands now, Sharif be prime minister for just a couple of months. We've got parliamentary elections held in 2023. But the campaign has already begun. You were talking about these rallies. Khan's also on Twitter. I saw him appealing to Pakistanis living overseas. I clicked on the link and went into a queue. There were 2,900 people in front of me. I mean, it just seems like this is going to be a never-ending campaign. So give me the dynamics there on the ground in Pakistan. What's it going to be like?
Absolutely. And in giving the dynamics, may I also sort of take the permission to respectfully disagree with the kind of feedback that was given on Imran Khan earlier on, I believe, by Ms. Farahnaz Ispahani. The truth is that the people of Pakistan have responded tremendously well to Imran Khan. While it is true that there's been inflation and a number of other things which at some point in time pushed people away from Imran Khan, but in terms of, for example, the response to COVID, Imran Khan's popularity has never been higher. The World Health Organization named Pakistan among the top 3 countries to deal with COVID, and there's this green initiative and invitations from Russia and the expansion of CPEC. So Imran Khan's popularity in Pakistan has not taken a hit in any way. In fact, it's quite higher than before. Also, this idea that somehow if Pakistan is unplugged from these IMF and West-centric loans that we're going to somehow sink is also something that I don't believe that Pakistan believes anymore. Even strategically, the strategic thinking of Pakistan, which was recently reflected in the Islamabad security dialogue somewhere in February, the state of Pakistan recognizes the opportunities that come up with China, that come up with Russia, that come up regionally with America's withdrawal from Afghanistan. And Imran Khan in many ways reflects that new thinking in Pakistan, which is why he's so popular among the youth. The second and the more important thing is that the comparison of Imran Khan to the other political party leaders that are against him in terms of Shehbaz Sharif, who has about 27 billion rupees of corruption cases against him. He's on bail currently. His son, who's the candidate for chief minister in Punjab, is on bail currently in money laundering cases. People's Party leader Asif Ali Zardari is on bail. So the
Saad, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt because we've run out of time. But thanks to all of our guests. I appreciate you joining in a really robust, lively conversation. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching another edition of The Heat.